Made in Abyss can be brutal. It can also be pretty weird. But even so, this anime has managed to garner massive praise from the vast majority of people who've watched it. A coming-of-age adventure that will leave most people speechless by the time they're done watching it. Rarely in anime will you see a series that doesn't shy away from more uncomfortable subject matter and imagery, but Made in Abyss is a bit different than most. Carefully crafted world full of wonder and tragedy. Unique scenery and exotic wildlife roam freely in the Abyss as humans try and learn more about it. It's a simple yet mystifying premise. There's also the OST to consider. Kevin Penkin does an incredible job crafting the music for the anime to truly elevate every single scene. It's recognizable and mesmerizing. There are so many different things that one can praise when it comes to this show, but today I wanted to look beyond the surface level. Underneath the music and the scenery lies characters that are put together with love and care. We'll be taking a look at specifically the contrast that builds a large amount of these characters. Before diving into things, I suppose I should define what I mean by contrast. Irony may be a better word to use, but you can just view it as meaning difference. Usually contrast is used to show comparisons with differences, but I'll simply be using differences in this case. The characters Made in Abyss tend to drift in the opposite direction of what you'd expect. I'll look at a few different characters in order to describe things most effectively. Of course, can't talk about characters not being what you'd expect without mentioning Reg. His character's probably one of the most, if not the most, developed in the series. Starting off with no memories and trying to make sense of the world around him, only to soon delve into a world that no one truly understands at all. Reg is a robot, but may be one of the most human characters in the show. Sure, his arms can extend as well as shoot fiery laser beams of death, and he's also extremely durable, but outside of the extremes, nothing would tell you he's any different from anyone else. Trying to become his own person, he goes through the depths with Riko and Nanachi. The fact that there's a whole bunch of memories that he should have is something that will likely continue to mess with him as it has up to this point. I'd imagine at some point he'll have to struggle with the idea of that if his memories come back, he might not be the same person. Memories make us who we are. Our fears, desires, and things that we cherish are all things we hold in our memories. So what happens when he regains what he had? Will what he lost be more important than what he has now? It's a question we don't have any way of knowing for sure, but I think we saw some hints of it here in Season 2. While fighting Vapta, his memories started to slip through, at least just a little bit. All those things flowing in ultimately caused him to stop fighting and let down his guard. Reg is also capable of making the more difficult decisions, like incinerating Midi and opening the Golden City Wall. He's a well-rounded character who tries his best to fight for what he believes in, while continuing to soak in different ideas from the world around him to continue building his new self. He may be robot, but he's extremely human. Similar to Reg, Nanachi is also somewhat inhuman. The curse of the sixth layer turned her into a hollow, stripping away her humanity. Despite this, like Reg, she's one of the more human characters in the show. She tries to carry herself as a sensible person, and most of the time she is, but when it comes to Midi, things change. Nanachi's fatal flaw is her inability to let go, and overcoming that wasn't as simple as saying goodbye once. Reg used the incinerator to destroy Midi at Nanachi's request, but not without some resistance, and this lingering then carried over to the second season, where Nanachi is fully prepared to give herself up to Belov in order to spend eternity with Midi, even if it's fake. It's perfectly realistic of her to do this. In the movie prior to Season 2, she would have just passed through the place where she and Midi became close friends. This strengthened sense of loss, after having just recently said goodbye in the first place, would likely have compelled her to relapse her decision to be done with Midi. After carrying Midi outside the boundary, Nanachi has likely resolved this issue now, as instead of relying on someone else to erase the burden, she's done it herself. Contrast applies to the antagonists of Made in Abyss as well. I'd say, thematically at least, that Bondrewd and Wazukyan are very similar characters. On the topic of humanity, still, they were both people with lofty goals, and had the advancement of humanity in mind. Of course, they may be well-intentioned, but both of them went about it in pretty much as morally bankrupt ways as you get. To advance humanity, they threw away their own. Bondrewd was someone who likely truly loved Prushka, but his love was in the end manipulative. Her feelings toward him cultivated so that he may use her as a way to traverse between the layers with lesser consequence. Her love was genuine, and so the curse went into her more than him. She took on that burden. It worked. Of course, she's now been reduced to a box of body parts and eventually Riko's white whistle. Wazukyan also had a habit of chopping things up, this time, however, in the form of Mirimui's children. It's a weird situation, as her kids were destined to perish, and the only way to counteract the contaminated water was through them, but There's obviously still a very large lingering moral issue. Bailoff especially was hurt by this and started to starve himself after learning of what was happening. Wazukan felt what he was doing was just and the correct thing to do. He saw himself in a godly position to save everyone and create his ideals through the situation, casting away his humanity along with everyone else to live in the Golden City, brought to life through Irimui's demise. Irimui herself, along with Veiko and Fapta, continue to fit the contrast role as important members of the second season. Veiko and Irimui, both unable to have children, end up being in the position of mothers, though the circumstances were not ideal. Veiko called Irimui her own warm darkness, a pretty blatant showing of contrast. Everything surrounding the two seemed bleak and terrible, but both of them cared for each other in ways that they didn't even know or understand. Veiko named all the children of Irimui, and on the flip side of things, Irimui didn't leave any feelings towards Veiko with Fapta, wanting to keep them all for herself. Fapta was the largest focus of the second season, and for good reason. Her existence is basically everything you wouldn't expect, the embodiment of contrast. She's a child of Irimui who actually survived. She's a very polarizing figure. She's revered by the city's people despite the fact that she's destined to obliterate them. Fapta is an innocent being at heart. Her brutal demeanor at times will try and hide that, but her interactions with Reg show a completely different side of her. Deep inside, she's just a kid who doesn't know anything of the world, but she was born out of a desire for justice, and so that innocence will bring death to the people who wronged her mother, a terrifying beauty. The people who once devoured her siblings end up offering themselves to her. They break themselves to build her back up. A cycle of destruction ends and allows the immortal princess to live life. How Made in Abyss is going to continue from here is something I have no real way of predicting. The manga, tragically, is only a few chapters ahead of where the anime ended, and the release schedule is spotty at best. The mangaka did mention that with the release of the anime and the game behind them, that they can go back to focusing on the manga and get chapters out a bit faster, but regardless, it's likely we'll have to wait a long time before we can even begin to think about a third season. Maybe I'll eat my words and going forward the characters will break out of this theme of contrast, or maybe I'll have to add a video in the future, assuming the third season comes out in a time frame where I'm still making videos at least. No matter how long it takes, I'll be waiting. Excited to see where this anime goes next in its journey of growth and pain.